I'm Owen Hartwell, 32 male. I live a simple life in a small log cabin in Buena Vista, Colorado, working maintenance at a local campground. My days are quiet, spent fixing trails and fences, surrounded by the scent of pine and the sound of the wind. This peaceful existence is a world away from the noise and pressure of my family's life in Denver, and I've never once regretted choosing it. But this story isn't about my quiet life. It's about how that quiet life was shattered by a devastating betrayal, a shocking discovery, and a lesson my father taught me from beyond the grave. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. 10 years ago, my life was completely different. I was living in Denver working for Hartwell Minerals Incorporated, our family's massive mining company. My father, Walter Hartwell, was the chairman and CEO. He was a legend in Colorado, a 63-year-old self-made man who built an empire from nothing. He was revered by his employees for his vision and unbreakable discipline. In the industry, his name was synonymous with success. But to me, he was just Dad, a stern, reserved father who kept his distance. His affection wasn't shown in hugs or praise. It was in the quiet, approving nod when I finished a task, or the way he kept a single, faded family photo on his pristine desk. He never moved it. It was his anchor. I tried to fit into his world. I worked at the company for 2 years, but it suffocated me. The endless meetings, the fake handshakes, the cold calculations of the boardroom, it wasn't me. I didn't belong in a world of million-dollar deals. When I was 24, our family broke. My mother passed away after a long illness. The grand house in Cherry Creek, once filled with her warmth, became a cold, silent museum of memories. Every corner reminded me of her smile, her voice, her knitting. My father, a man I'd always seen as indestructible as granite, couldn't handle the loss. He never cried, but I watched him visibly age. His sharp eyes clouded over with a sorrow he refused to speak about. He soon left that house and moved to a smaller villa in Evergreen, a place they used to spend weekends. I left too. I left Denver entirely, searching for a place where the past wouldn't be the first thing I saw every morning. That's how I ended up in Buena Vista. My new life was built around routine. I repaired old things my mother had loved, a pendulum clock, a wooden music box. Touching them felt like connecting to her, to the memories of her telling me stories about the Colorado mountains. Every weekend, I'd drive my old pickup 2 hours to Evergreen to visit my father. I'd bring him fresh bread and my tools. We didn't talk much. I'd check his generator, clean the yard, or trim the grass while he sat in his study, surrounded by geological maps. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me from the window. We'd sit on the porch with hot tea, watching the lake, and exchange a few words about the weather or my work. When night fell, I'd leave. He'd stand on the porch, arms crossed, a small, steadfast figure against the mountain, watching my taillights disappear. We didn't need words. There was an unspoken bond between us, stronger than any conversation. I didn't know that a storm was brewing beneath those peaceful days. My father, the man who seemed unshakable, was standing on the edge. And I, the quiet son, was about to face a challenge that would unravel our family and expose the hidden corners of my own heart. The days continued, but a heavy sense of unease started to settle in my chest. On my weekend visits, I noticed the changes. My father was thinner, his steps were slower. His eyes, still sharp, would often drift to some distant point, lost in a memory I couldn't access. He started sighing, deep, heavy sighs I'd never heard from him before. "Are you okay, Dad?" I'd ask. "I'm fine, don't worry," he'd say, his voice firm. But I knew he was hiding something. Forcing him to talk was impossible. One afternoon in early March, I was at the campground when my phone buzzed with a Denver area code. It was Ellen, his personal secretary. Her voice was frantic. "Owen, you need to get to the hospital. Now, Mr. Walter." He collapsed during a meeting. "They're taking him to Denver Health." My heart stopped. I dropped my tools, yelled to a coworker that I had to go, and sprinted to my truck. I don't remember the 100-mile drive. My mind was just a loop of my father's face. The man who stood like a mountain now collapsed. I floored it, the winding mountain roads blurring past. The unease I'd been feeling had finally become what I feared most. I kept telling myself he was just tired, that he'd be fine, but deep down I knew this was it. I ran into the hospital, the smell of antiseptic hitting me like a wall. Ellen was at the reception, pale and trembling. "He's in the ER," she choked out. "The doctors, they said it's chronic myocardial ischemia, early-stage heart failure. He's had high blood pressure for a long time, but he never told anyone." I just stood there, frozen. All those times he'd quietly taken pills, the chest pains he'd brushed off. He had hidden it all. I signed the surgery papers and sat outside the ER, the clock on the wall ticking like a hammer blow. I thought of him in his study of my mother, and the fear of losing him too was overwhelming. Finally, a doctor came out. He's stable, but it's serious. He needs complete rest, no stress. Any strong episode could stop his heart. Complete rest, for my father, that was a death sentence. His entire life was the company. I called my brother Miles right away. Miles was my father's pride. At 36, he was sharp, ambitious, and ran the investment branch of Hartwell Minerals in New York. He was the ideal heir born to lead. I was just the kind son, the one without ambition. We were day and night. He answered, his voice distracted. "Owen, what's up?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "Dad's in the hospital, heart failure, you need to come back now." There was a sigh on the other end. "I'll try to sort things out, work here is a mess, I'll fly back as soon as I can." He hung up, a weight like a stone settled in my chest. I knew what "as soon as I can" meant. For the next few days, the hospital became my world. I sat by my father's side, managing his meals and medication. He was so much weaker, but his tough facade remained. "Don't worry," he'd rasp. "I'm not going to die that easily." I'd force a smile, my heart aching. I watched him through the long nights, listening to his restless breathing, and saw not the titan of industry, but an aging man who needed his son. Miles finally arrived on the third day after Dad was already past the critical stage. He strode into the room in a sharp suit, looking more tired than worried. He gave me a brief, awkward hug, asked the doctor a few curt questions, and then sat down, his thumbs immediately flying across his phone. "I can only stay a few hours," he announced, not looking up. "Work in New York can't wait." I just nodded. I knew he wouldn't stay. For Miles, the company was always the priority. Our father, I realized, was just a duty to be checked off a list. Dad was discharged after a week with strict orders for absolute rest. I drove him back to the villa in Evergreen, the quiet like a perfect backdrop for his recovery. Miles immediately suggested hiring a full-time nurse and a caregiver. "I don't need strangers in my house," Dad said, his voice firm. "I don't want anyone seeing me like this." I understood. He had spent a lifetime maintaining his dignity. He couldn't stand being seen as weak. Miles, however, took this as his cue. "Owen, you're nearby," he said, already pulling his suitcase to the door. "You can take care of Dad, I'll support you from afar." He flew back to New York that same evening. I didn't argue. Arguing with Miles was like arguing with a brick wall. So I moved into the Evergreen Villa. I became my father's full-time caregiver. I cooked his meals, sorted his pills, and supported him on slow walks. Sometimes he'd grip my hand, a silent thank you. It was exhausting. I was constantly terrified, worried about his health, and scared that if I faltered, there would be no one else. Miles called occasionally. The calls were always short, filled with cursory questions about Dad before pivoting back to his work, his deals, his life. He'd sometimes stop by for a few hours on his way to a business meeting, looking more like a visitor than a son. I didn't blame him, not really. It was just who he was, but I could feel the last bridge between us starting to crumble. The weeks turned into months. I settled into a routine: wake at dawn, brew Dad's tea, prepare his oatmeal. I'd help him to the porch where he'd sit for hours, gazing at the lake, his eyes tinged with a sadness I'd never seen before. He hated depending on me, I knew, but we found a quiet rhythm. One winter morning, the world outside was blanketed in snow. I woke up early, the air in the house freezing. I went downstairs to start breakfast, but the house was unnervingly silent. No cough from my father's room, no sound of him stirring. A chilling premonition shot down my spine. I ran up the stairs, my heart pounding. The door to his room was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The dim morning light fell on his face. He looked peaceful, too peaceful. His hand was resting on the old family photo, the one of the four of us back when Mom was alive. "Dad," I called softly. Only silence. I knelt by his bed and took his hand. It was cold. I gripped it as if I could pull him back, but I knew he was gone. My father, the invincible Walter Hartwell, had left me in his sleep. I just sat there, I don't know for how long. The pain was too vast to even process. I called Miles. He picked up, his voice flat. "Owen, what's up this early?" I took a deep breath. "Dad's gone, Miles." There was a long pause. Then in a voice eerily calm, he said, "I'll come back as soon as I can." He always had a reason. Work, a meeting, something. I hung up feeling completely hollow. I was alone. I had to handle everything. I called the hospital, the funeral home. I called Ellen. I called his old friends. Each call was like a knife, but I did it. I was the quiet son, and I was the only one left to see him off. On the day of the funeral, the small evergreen cemetery was filled with people. Employees, old friends, industry figures. They all came to pay their respects to a man who was a legend. An old engineer pulled me aside. "You should be proud, son." I nodded, feeling nothing but empty. Miles, of course, was late. Just as the ceremony was about to begin, a sleek black car pulled up. He stepped out, his suit immaculate, his eyes cold. He walked to the casket, bowed his head for a moment, and then turned to me. "Sorry, Owen, urgent business delayed me, missed my flight." His voice was flat, like he was explaining a late shipment to a client. I didn't even look at him. I couldn't. About a week later, we were summoned to the lawyer's office in Denver for the reading of the will. It was just me, Miles, and Graham Porter, my father's trusted lawyer for over 20 years. Graham opened a sealed envelope and began to read. "All shares and operational control of Hartwell Minerals, along with related investments and properties, are transferred to Miles Hartwell." Miles sat up straighter, a confident, satisfied glint in his eye. He nodded as if accepting a well-deserved award. I just lowered my head. I had expected this. I was never the heir. Graham paused, then glanced at me. "To Owen Hartwell, I bequeath Hartwell Ridge along with the log cabin on it located in western Fremont County." I froze. Hartwell Ridge, the desolate, abandoned farm he'd taken me to as a kid. It was nothing but rocks, weeds, and wind. It was worthless. Miles let out a soft laugh. It cut through the quiet room like a razor. He leaned back, crossing his arms, his voice dripping with sarcastic pity. "Well, that's fair," he sneered. "You take care of Dad for a whole year and you get a barren patch of dirt. Poor Owen, trying so hard to be the good son only to end up with the scraps. The real legacy was always coming to me." I sat perfectly still, my hand gripping the armrest, my blood running cold. I listened to my brother's smug, triumphant laughter, the laughter of a man who had just won a game that was rigged from the start. I just sat there, paralyzed by the casual cruelty of his words. Poor Owen. The scraps. My entire year of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the fear, the exhaustion, the intimate moments of caring for our dying father was dismissed in a single mocking laugh. He saw it all as a failed transaction, a bad investment on my part. I stared at the polished wood of the desk, my knuckles white on the armrest. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Miles was still smirking when Graham Porter cleared his throat. The sound was sharp, cutting off my brother's self-congratulation. "There is a second envelope," Graham said, his face unreadable. He slid his letter opener under the wax seal of a heavy manila envelope that had been sitting to the side. The room, which had been filled with Miles's arrogance, suddenly fell into a stifling, heavy silence. Even Miles leaned forward, his smile fading into a look of confusion. Graham pulled out a multi-page document and began to read in the same steady, monotone voice. "This document pertains to the aforementioned Hartwell Ridge property." He detailed that approximately 10 years prior, Walter Hartwell had signed a contract granting Silver Rock Mining Corporation exploration rights on that barren land. I vaguely remembered Dad mentioning some geological surveys, but I'd assumed it was just a hobby, a way for him to explore the mountains he loved. Graham continued, "Recently, the exploration concluded. Silver Rock Mining has confirmed the discovery of a significant deposit of rare earth minerals beneath Hartwell Ridge." My head snapped up. I looked at Graham, then at Miles. My brother's face was frozen, his eyes wide. "The corporation," Graham read on, "has extended an official offer to purchase the full and complete mining rights to the land." He paused, adjusted his glasses, and looked directly at me. "The offer is for $75 million. The number just hung in the air. It didn't feel real. 75 million. "Furthermore," Graham continued, his voice unwavering, "the offer includes annual royalties on all extracted minerals for the next 15 years, valued at an estimated $10 million per year." The silence in the room was so profound I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I felt dizzy, disorient. I couldn't process it. I risked a glance at Miles. His face was a mask of disbelief. The color had drained from his skin, leaving him a pasty, sickly gray. His smug confidence had vanished, replaced by a look of stunned, raw envy. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching in his cheek. His hands, which had been crossed so arrogantly, were now balled into fists on the table. He wasn't just shocked, he was furious. Graham Porter closed the file. "That is the entirety of the will. Congratulations, Owen. Your father has left you a very significant legacy." I couldn't speak, I just nodded, my mind reeling. My father, he must have known this was a possibility. He had left Miles the company he coveted, and he had left me. This, a quiet hidden fortune, a final message I couldn't yet decipher. We left the office in a daze. Miles walked beside me, radiating a tension so thick it was almost visible. He didn't speak. He didn't look at me. The moment we hit the sidewalk, he just grunted, turned, and strode to his car without a single word. I drove back to Buena Vista, the 2-hour trip a complete blur. $75 million, the barren patch of dirt, my brother's laugh, my father's silence, it all swirled in my head. Never underestimate the value of what seems insignificant. A few weeks later, my phone rang. Mr. Owen Hartwell, this is Daniel Brooks, a representative from Silver Rock Mining. We'd like to discuss Hartwell Ridge. 2 days later, Mr. Brooks was sitting in my small log cabin, a thick stack of documents on my simple wooden table. He patiently explained the findings, the value of the minerals, and the terms of the contract. It was all real. I thought long and hard. I sat in my mother's old rocking chair, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what my father would want. This wasn't just money, it was a choice. In the end, I signed the contract. Not because I craved the wealth, but because I saw an opportunity to do something meaningful, something my parents would have been proud of. A few weeks later, I checked my bank account. The number was staggering. I sat there for a long time, my hands trembling. Strangely, my life didn't change. I stayed in my cabin, I drove my old truck. I still went to work at the campground. My coworkers teased me, "Why aren't you on a beach somewhere?" I just smiled. I was afraid of the money, afraid it would change me, turn me into Miles. Gradually, I learned to manage it. I hired a financial advisor. And then I founded the Hartwell Foundation, a fund to support vocational education for underprivileged kids in Colorado's mountain towns. I named it after my parents. My father always said, "Money isn't the goal, Owen, it's a tool." I wanted to use that tool to give others the chance to build something for themselves just like he did. I also went back to Hartwell Ridge. The land, once just rocks and weeds, now felt different. I hired architects and engineers to build a small, beautiful ecolodge, a place that blended with the landscape. I wanted to create jobs, to bring life back to this land my father had so quietly preserved. Standing there watching local workers build the first frames, I felt a quiet pride. This was my father's true legacy. Not a cold corporation, but a chance to build, to give back, to honor the land he loved. Meanwhile, Miles officially took the throne at Hartwell Minerals. Ellen would call me, her voice filled with anxiety. He was restructuring, cutting staff, and shifting strategy. He was going to usher the company into a new era. But then the rumors started, missed renewals on old contracts. An expansion project in Nevada shut down for environmental violations. The company's stock began to plummet. "He's making a mess, Owen," Ellen told me, her voice cracking. "The veteran employees, your father's guys, they're all quitting. They say he's too arrogant, too hasty." My heart sank. Miles was smart, but his arrogance was a blind spot the size of a mountain. He was going to destroy everything our father had built. I didn't take any pleasure in hearing about Miles's struggles. Hartwell Minerals wasn't just a name, it was my father's entire life. It was the livelihood of hundreds of employees, many of whom I'd known since I was a kid, but I also knew my brother. Offering help he hadn't asked for would be seen as an insult, and I told you so. He didn't call me, and I didn't call him. I focused on my own projects. The ecolodge at Hartwell Ridge was taking shape, its wooden cabins blending seamlessly into the landscape. The Hartwell Foundation awarded its first round of scholarships. Seeing the faces of those kids, knowing they'd get to learn a trade and build a future, felt more real and more valuable than any number in my bank account. It felt like I was continuing my father's true work. But in the background, the news about Hartwell Minerals kept getting worse. Ellen's calls became more infrequent but more desperate. The company was drowning in debt. A massive bank loan my father had taken out for a long-term expansion was coming due, and Miles had drained the cash reserves. Major shareholders were pulling out. The media, which had once celebrated the promising heir, was now openly questioning his leadership. One late afternoon, I was at the lodge site checking the new irrigation system. The air was crisp and the sun was setting over the mountains. I heard the sound of a car, a low, expensive hum that didn't belong. A sleek black car, caked in dust, pulled up to the gate. Miles stepped out. I barely recognized him. He was wearing a wrinkled suit, his face gaunt. The arrogant, confident brother who had mocked me in the lawyer's office was gone. In his place was a man who looked haunted, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion and something I'd never seen in him before, fear. He walked toward me, his expensive leather shoes sinking into the red dirt. He just stood there for a moment, looking at the construction, at the mountains, at me. "Owen," he said, his voice was hoarse, "I need to talk to you." I nodded and led him to the small, original cabin. I brewed coffee and put a mug in front of him. He just stared at it. "The company's collapsing," he said bluntly. No greeting, no apology, just raw desperation. "I've tried everything. I can't do it alone. I need your help." His words hit me harder than his insults. This wasn't just a plea, it was a confession. He had failed. I looked at him, the brother who had abandoned our father, the brother who had laughed at me. I didn't trust him. But then I thought of my father. I thought of his portrait in the main office, of the hundreds of employees about to lose their jobs. I thought of his name, our name, being dragged through the mud. I couldn't let it happen, not for Miles, but for Dad. "All right," I said, my voice calm. "I'll help, but on one condition. I see everything. All the financial records, every contract, the personnel structure. I'm not pouring my money into a black hole." He nodded quickly, a flash of relief in his eyes. But there was something else too, a flicker of tension. He was afraid of what I'd find. The following week, I was in Denver. I assembled a small, trusted team, a forensic accountant and a corporate lawyer I'd hired with my new wealth. We set up in my father's old office. It felt strange to be there, surrounded by the scent of walnut and old paper. Miles had handed over the keys, claiming he had to manage the external partners, and made himself scarce. It didn't take long to understand why. What we uncovered wasn't just mismanagement. It was a systematic train wreck. Miles hadn't just been arrogant, he'd been reckless. He had launched half-dozen high-risk, high-glamour overseas projects that were hemorrhaging money. He had let core domestic mining contracts, the company's bread and butter, lapse due to simple negligence. Worse, he had surrounded himself with yes men, ousting my father's veteran engineers and promoting unqualified flatterers. He was spending lavishly on consulting firms that produced useless reports, all while the company's core operations rotted from within. "Owen," my accountant said, pointing to a ledger, "he's been shuffling money between projects to hide the losses. This isn't just bad business, it's dangerously close to fraud." He had tried to modernize the company, but his haste and his desperate need to prove he was better than our father had dug a bottomless pit. He had been trying to build his own legacy, and in doing so, he was setting fire to our father's. I sat back in my father's chair, the cold, hard numbers spread out before me. The company was weeks, not months, from total insolvency. The bank loan was a ticking time bomb. My first instinct was to just pay the debt. Write a check, make the problem go away, but that wouldn't solve anything, it would just be a bandage. Miles would do it again. I thought about my father's words, patience, integrity. I wasn't just going to plug a leak, I was going to rebuild the ship, and to do that, I needed to take the helm. "Here's what we're going to do," I said to my team. "We aren't just going to be a bank, we're going to be owners." I made a call to Graham Porter, my father's lawyer. "Graham," I said, "I need to buy into Hartwell Minerals, but I need to do it in a way that protects the company from everyone, including my brother." We began to formulate a plan. I wouldn't just give Miles money. I would use part of my wealth to buy out the panicked shareholders who were dumping their stock, and I would use my new position to force a total restructuring. I called the veteran engineers, the old guard Miles had fired. I met with them in secret. "I'm coming back," I told them, "but I need you to help me save my father's company." Their response was immediate, they were loyal. To Walter Hartwell, not to Miles. I was done being the quiet son. My father had left me a tool and I was finally going to use it. I wasn't just going to save Hartwell Minerals, I was going to take it back. My plan wasn't just about money, it was about control. The first step was to stop the bleeding. I used my funds to buy back 40% of the company's shares from the investors who were fleeing the sinking ship. This move, made quietly through a holding company, instantly made me the second largest shareholder, right behind Miles. The next step was to face the board. They were terrified, watching their own investments evaporate. I called an emergency meeting. When I walked in, they looked at me like a ghost. I was Owen, the quiet one, the campground worker. Miles, sitting at the head of the table, looked stunned. He clearly expected me to just write a check and disappear. I didn't waste time. My team laid out the truth. The tangled finances, the failing projects, the impending default. We showed them the full, unvarnished picture of Miles's disaster. Then I laid out my plan. Hartwell Minerals will not be taking a bailout, I announced. It will be restructured. We will return to our core, domestic mining and mineral processing. We will liquidate these failed overseas projects immediately. We will cut the waste. And we will rehire the engineering talent that built this company. And who's going to lead this? One of the board members asked, his voice shaking. I said, I am the new primary investor, and I am bringing my own team. The room was silent. Miles was white-hot with rage. You can't do this, Owen. This is my company. You're right, it was your company, I said, my voice cold. And you've driven it into the ground. My investment is contingent on my team taking operational control. Either you accept my help and my terms, or I let the banks take everything. Your choice. He had no choice. The board, seeing a lifeline, voted unanimously to approve my plan. Miles was allowed to keep his title as chairman, a figurehead to handle external relations, a polite way of getting him out of the building. I took control of operations and finance. The restructuring was brutal but necessary. We rehired my father's veteran engineers. They returned with a fierce loyalty, and we immediately went to work. We renegotiated the massive bank loan using my own capital as collateral. We liquidated the disastrous overseas projects, cutting our losses. We re-established transparent financial systems. In the early stages, Miles was surprisingly cooperative. He was humbled, or at least he acted like it. He handled the external meetings, renegotiating with partners he had alienated. I managed the internal operations. We worked side by side, rarely speaking, a fragile truce hanging between us. It wasn't forgiveness, it was shared responsibility. But as the company began to stabilize, I knew this truce wouldn't last. Miles's pride was a wound that would never heal. He was watching me succeed where he had failed, using our father's old methods. I was proving him wrong, and I knew he would never forgive me for it. This is where I had to think like my father. I couldn't trust my brother. I needed an insurance policy. I went back to Graham Porter. Miles will try to push me out the second we're profitable, I said. I need a way to protect the company permanently. Graham, who had seen it all, nodded. Your father anticipated this, Owen. Not this exact scenario, perhaps, but he knew his sons. He knew Miles's ambition, and he knew your strength even when you didn't. He proposed something brilliant, a special share agreement tied to my investment. I wasn't just buying common stock. I was buying a special class of shares. The agreement, which Graham drafted with ironclad precision, stipulated that if Hartwell Minerals successfully restructured within 3 years and achieved a specific, ambitious profit threshold, my ownership shares would automatically convert, granting me permanent, controlling interest. It was a long shot. We had to not just save the company, we had to make it more successful than ever. But I believed in my father's team. And Graham added, we should do one more thing. He helped me set up a share trust agreement. I met privately with the veteran employees, the ones who had returned. I offered them generous stock options as a reward for their loyalty, with one condition: they placed their voting rights in a trust that I controlled. They agreed without hesitation. Their loyalty was to Walter Hartwell's legacy, and they saw that I was protecting it. When all the documents were signed, notarized, and filed away, I held the real power. Between my converted shares and the employee trust, if we hit our targets, I would control over 55% of the company. I told no one, not the board, and especially not Miles. It was my final card, my protection against the betrayal I knew was. That's coming. For the next 18 months, we worked tirelessly. The changes took hold. The domestic mines resumed operations, safer and more efficient than ever. We launched new product lines. The banks, seeing our performance, offered new lines of credit. Investors returned. Within 2 years, Hartwell Minerals wasn't just stable, it was thriving. We posted record profits, 35% higher than the company's peak under my father. My face started appearing on business magazines. They called me the quiet heir, the savior of Hartwell Minerals. The press, the shareholders, the employees, they all came to me for answers. At first, Miles seemed pleased. He smiled for the cameras, shook my hand at meetings, and talked about the Hartwell brothers' unity. But I saw the shift in his eyes. The more the media praised me, the quieter he became. The gratitude he'd shown when he was desperate curdled into a familiar, bitter resentment. The gap between us, which I'd hoped might close, was widening into a chasm. I had saved his company, I had saved his reputation, and he hated me for it. I knew he was going to make a move. I just had to be patient and let him. My father's voice was always in my head. Don't rush, Owen. Time will give you the answers. As Hartwell Minerals' success became the biggest story in Colorado, Miles began his campaign. He was the chairman, and he used his position to slowly, subtly rewrite the narrative. In interviews, he'd talk about my strategic vision and the difficult decisions I had to make during the crisis. He positioned himself as the grand strategist who had bravely steered the ship, while I was relegated to the role of strategic advisor or financial partner. The team of veteran engineers who had actually saved the company were never mentioned. I watched it all from my cabin in Buena Vista, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. He wasn't just taking credit, he was erasing me. I'd saved the company for our father, not for fame, but this was a deep, calculated betrayal. Then came the emails. One morning, I received a cold, formal message from the board. It stated that, as part of a new leadership restructuring for unified control, my direct operational authority was being temporarily revoked. I was being reassigned to an oversight role, effective immediately. At the bottom was Miles's digital signature, alongside those of two board members he had clearly won over. I stared at the screen, the floor dropping out from beneath me. After everything, he wasn't just pushing me aside, he was pushing me out, legally. I closed my laptop, walked onto my porch, and looked at the mountains. I thought of my father, of the family photo, and I thought of the special share agreement sitting in Graham Porter's safe. The profit threshold from the agreement, we had officially passed it 3 months ago. Miles didn't know it, but he hadn't just revoked my authority, he had triggered his own removal. He made his final move a week later. He announced an extraordinary shareholders meeting. The agenda, to set a new strategic direction and remove leadership elements no longer suitable for the company's future. He was targeting me, he was going to hold a public execution. He even called me, his voice smooth and confident. "You'll be there, right, Owen? This is a big turning point for the company." "I wouldn't miss it," I said. I called Graham, "It's time." The day of the meeting, the main conference room was packed. The air was thick with tension. Shareholders, executives, and even press were lined up against the back wall. Miles stood at the podium, the picture of a confident, powerful CEO. He was back. He presented a glowing report of the company's success, his success, and then he moved to the main event. To continue this incredible growth, he announced, we need a single, unified vision. We must remove redundant oversight roles that slow down our progress. He proposed a resolution to consolidate leadership, a polished, legal way of firing me from the company I had saved. He was asking the shareholders to choose between us, and he believed he had already won. As he was about to call the vote, I stood up. The room fell silent, all eyes turned to me. "Before we vote," I said, my voice calm and clear, "I have something to present." Miles froze, his smile faltering. On cue, Graham Porter, holding a leather briefcase, walked to the front of the room. "If I may," he said, addressing the board. Graham opened the briefcase and distributed a set of documents to every shareholder. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a special share agreement, signed 2 years ago as a condition of Mr. Owen Hartwell's initial investment." He explained the terms. He pointed to the company's own financial reports, the ones Miles had just been bragging about. As of the last quarter, Hartwell Minerals has officially met the profit thresholds outlined in this agreement. As such, Mr. Owen Hartwell's S.H. Aries have automatically converted, granting him a 35% controlling interest. A wave of gasps and murmurs swept the room. Miles's face went from confused to pale. That's not possible, that's only 35%. "Correct," Graham said, holding up a second file. "This is the Hartwell Employee Trust Agreement. The veteran employees who were personally rehired by Mr. Owen Hartwell placed their voting rights, totaling 20% of company shares, in a trust." Graham paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "A trust that Mr. Owen Hartwell controls. As of this morning, Owen Hartwell legally controls 55% of this company." The room was stunned. Miles looked like he'd been punched. He was sputtering, This is deceit, you tricked me." I finally looked at my brother. There was no anger in my voice, no triumph, just a deep, profound sadness. "I didn't trick you, Miles," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. "I protected the company. I protected Dad's legacy from your arrogance. You were so busy trying to prove you were the heir, you forgot to be a good leader." I turned to the shareholders. "Miles's resolution is dead. I am now proposing my own. the immediate removal of Miles Hartwell as chairman and from the board of directors for acting against the best interests of this company. There was no debate. The shareholders, seeing the truth, voted overwhelmingly. It was over in an instant. I left the meeting, leaving Miles standing alone at the podium, his defeat total and public. I felt no joy. I had won, but I had lost my brother for good. As I stepped out into the Denver sunlight, I felt only the heavy burden of a promise kept. The weeks that followed were tense. I officially took over as chairman of Hartwell Minerals. Miles, stripped of all power, didn't go quietly. In a final, desperate move, he tried to sell his remaining shares, the ones our father had left him, to a private investment group in New York, hoping to raise capital to start a new, rival company. He was going to burn it all down on his way out. What he didn't know in his haste was that the group he was dealing with was under federal investigation for financial fraud. When regulators caught wind of the transaction, Miles's assets were frozen. He was sued for attempting to transfer legally bound assets during an investigation. To cover his mounting legal debts and avoid prosecution, he was forced into a fire sale of his remaining Hartwell shares. There was only one buyer, me. When the transaction was finalized, I became the sole legal owner of my father's company. Standing in his office, I looked at his portrait on the wall. I had saved his legacy, but the cost was devastating. Miles disappeared from Denver. I heard through Graham that he'd moved to Astoria, Oregon, a small, rainy town by the coast. His wife, accustomed to the glamour of New York, had left him. He was living in a small rented house, taking on freelance consulting gigs to scrape by. The man who was given an empire had lost it all. With the company secure, I turned my attention back to Hartwell Ridge. I expanded the Ecolodge into the Walter Hartwell Reserve, a massive nature preserve dedicated to protecting the land. It became a place for education, for community, and a symbol of sustainable, honorable business. 2 years passed. Hartwell Minerals under my leadership became a model for the industry. We were profitable, but we were also responsible. We created thousands of jobs. The Hartwell Foundation grew, building homes for mining families and funding geology scholarships. Every thank you letter I received felt like a quiet nod from my father. I still live in my cabin in Buena Vista. I still drive my old truck. The peace of this place is my true reward. One day I was in my office and picked up that old family photo, the one from Dad's desk. I looked at Miles, the confident little boy, and felt a pang of sadness for everything we had lost. I packaged it up, wrote a small note. I believed Dad would still want to see us both there like before, and sent it to his address in Astoria. I never expected a reply. Late that winter, I decided to visit the villa in Evergreen. I hadn't been back in a long time. The house was cold, a perfect time capsule. I sat at my father's desk, sorting through his old papers. Tucked in the back of a drawer, I found a small brown envelope. On it, in my father's firm hand, it read, "To Owen." My hands trembled as I opened it. "Owen," the letter began, "I know you've wondered why I left the estate as I did. I didn't love Miles more. I did it because I understood you both. Miles has spent his life trying to prove his greatness while you have always shied away from it. One needed to learn humility, the other needed to learn to believe in himself. That farm isn't just land, it's the true legacy. Patience, integrity, and the value of hard work. If you hold on to those, you'll have everything, and if one day the calm penny falls into your hands, remember this: don't let power consume your soul. Wealth can be lost, but honor must be preserved. Walter Hartwell. I sat there, the letter in my hands, as the pieces of my life clicked into place. The pain, the betrayal, the fight, it had all been a test. My father hadn't been unfair. He had seen us, really seen us, and he'd given each of us the challenge we needed. Miles, given everything, had to learn humility. I, given nothing, had to find my strength. I returned to Denver and had my father's last words engraved on a bronze plaque at the entrance of the headquarters. Wealth can be lost, but honor must be preserved. My father didn't leave me a mineral deposit. He left me a lesson in character. The true heir isn't the one named in a will, it's the one who upholds the family's values. I know now I've done what he wanted. I lived rightly, I held on to our honor, and I protected his legacy. And in the quiet of the mountains, that is more than enough.